So security in Cloud Firestore is actually fairly simple for us to do. It was tough the first time I tried to use Firestore, but they really made this easy to use in my mind. So we're going to just try and step over the guide step by step, and then I'm going to try and show you guys how you can implement it inside your own solution right here on Firebase. And what we're going to start out with is you have a getting started guide. So here's the overview. Go and read that. It's of course security rules is two things for you. We need to first of all protect access to different data areas. Like you shouldn't allow people to write to products unless they are some kind of admin user. You shouldn't allow people to write to stocks. Actually, maybe nobody can write to stocks because that's actually a system solution. It's up to you how you want to build it, but you need to kind of secure your data with these rules in Firestore. So that's the main goal. And the second thing is they have made a way so you can actually also validate with these rules if you want to make sure you don't get invalid data into your data system. He's made a small guide right here. I asked most of you to see it, and if you haven't yet, go and check it out. He's always happy and he's a good guy to explain, so go and check it out if you want to. We are using Security Rules version 2. That's where they made some pretty amazing changes. Again, you can go and check out the changes, but you have some recursive wildcard that changed, and they added a way for you to do better security for sub collections and stuff like that. So you can go and check it out if you want to. But this is actually how security rules look. So you have a start like this that says we're working with version 2, and you're working on Cloud Firestore, and then here's where you start defining your database documents. And just to kind of have something to talk about, let's try and jump into my solution right here. If I go into Firestore and I go into rules right here, you'll see this is actually my rule set right here. And you'll notice a cool thing they just added that's also in version 2. They added a way for you to kind of that's after they created version 2. They added a way for you to actually have a history of what you changed. They also have a playground right here where you can go and just try out some rules and see what happens yourself. And you can actually say if you're authenticated or not and stuff like that. So it's a pretty good way to simulate. So here, for instance, I could say, what if I want to get my products? I need the path, so I need to put in the entire path actually. We'll play around with that later. But what if I actually wanted to get products and I was not authenticated? Would I get an error? So you can test that out right here with these different rule engines right here. I can see a couple more joining. There we go. Mate. Good morning, everyone. So this is a way for you to test your rules with this playground right here. So you have a lot of functionality in the cloud ready to use actually. The reason that I have two changes right here is because I changed the date, because at some point, of course, you're being told, well, you can't use this anymore with read and write for everybody, because we have an if statement right here saying you're only allowed to do this if the request time is before a certain date, right? So you might have gotten a warning per mail saying that your time is actually expiring. So that's actually pretty nice that they are protecting you like that. So that's where you can find the rules, first of all. Let's try and go back to the getting started guide right here. Again, if I scroll down. So here's how we can write some rules. And again, I don't feel the Firestore rules are that complex. It's a lot easier for you to actually go in and read about this yourself and try and implement some of these rules. So here's an example where we say, what do we want to allow, right? And it's pretty much just you explain, you match a path to your database, right? And then here's a subpath, and then you actually say, I want to allow to read and write if, and then you put in a condition. So it's pretty much just an if statement for the different areas. So it's not overly complex. Here's an example where they actually say, we allow here that you read and write if you are logged in, right? If it's not null. right? So that's an if statement that you need to be authenticated to work with this. I'm just getting another one into the meeting. There we go. So again, it's really not complex. And again, if we scroll down here, we say nobody is allowed to do anything in the database by saying it's false. So notice that the little bit complex thing might be that this is how they write their if statements, right? If false and if not null. So you just have to get used to this syntax. And here, allow all. That's the one we're using right now, actually, the allow all. But in our system, we don't allow all. We actually say we only allow, there it is. We only allow again if the request time is before this timestamp right here. Let's see if I can zoom a little bit. I can. So back to the guide. So here we actually have a testing rules, and that's actually because you can do unit testing of rules. And I want to show you this, just a small example, and then you guys can consider if you want to do unit testing for your rules. And there's deployment, of course, where you can do a deploy, and it can take up to 10 minutes, just have to be aware of that. And then you also have the rules tab, etc. So again, there's nothing scary right here in my mind. So this is how you deploy it, right? You've used the deploy before. This is just with rules this time, not with hosting or functions. So it's just another way to do deploy. So I hope that makes sense. It's really not complex. This is also, of course, important. You say Firebase init Firestore, and it'll create a file for you called rules. I just want to show you that file right here. I actually put mine in functions. Again, you could make another project for rules, but it's really only one file. So I decided to do it in here. So here's actually two files. The one that I'm using right now is the rules, and you'll see it looks a lot like the one you saw on Firebase's page for Firestore Rules, right? It's the same information you see right here. Because when I created mine, I just copied the rules as they are right now into this file. And again, you'll see small explanation right here, and then you have the exact same code that you saw up there. A second thing that's worth noticing is we got this Firestore indexing JSON. You don't have to use this. This is, again, for indexing your database, which makes faster searching, but you don't have to worry about that in this project or this semester. It's up to you. You can go and read about it, but that actually comes whenever you do rules, you get indexing in the same request. So it's really up to you if you want to use it. The final change that happened when you run that command is you get these two in here as well in the Firebase JSON file. You get rules and indexes in here as well. So it knows what files to look for to deploy these rules and indexes, right? So that's all you're doing with that command right there, the init Firestore. So we'll just continue down the chain and just take a bit more. I'll just invite Alex. There we go. We'll say structure security rules down here. Have a look at what that is all about. This is what I just talked about right here. And first of all, have a look right here. We say the basic setup again is that you need this to get started. So this is something you always need in your rule set. And then here's the first match I'm looking for. And in this case, I'm saying I want to match cities, right? And you have to put in a specific document name right here. It says as a rule lower down here, you have to put in a specific name or a wildcard. You cannot just say cities and nothing else. You need to put in the final part right here. But you can put in wildcard saying it's for every document in here. And here we say allow read if and allow write if. So that's kind of the structure you're going to use, right? So that's how you will write these rules. I just keep going because you can also do it granular. So this pretty much just means that I can say you can only get single, you can get a list. So this is kind of the read, right? You have two different ways you can read. And then you can also specify more precisely that in this condition you can create, in this condition you can update, and in this condition you can delete. That might be, you can create a new user yourself maybe, but you cannot update the user, you need an admin to do that. You cannot delete the user, you need an admin to do that. maybe, or you can create a new product. You can also update it, but you're actually not allowed to delete it. It's only an admin that can do that. Then you can be more precise. So you also saw these different commands when we looked at reading and writing data to Firestore. And you also noticed probably that we have the write function, but we actually also had a function that was more specific for create, update, and delete, right? So it's the same idea. You can either be say anything to do with write, or you can and anything to do with read, or you can be more granular and say we can also only get a single, or we can get a list, or we can create, update, and delete specifically. Then they have a small example right here on hierarchical data, which is because we might have data inside data, right? So sub-collections, for instance. And this is how you could work with sub-collections if you want to play around with that. Again, notice the important part is that we have the match in the outside layer right here, saying cities, where we are allowed to read and write. And then we have some explicit rules right here for the landmark that says read and write. It's important. There's a small thing you need to know right here, and that is that you can actually be more specific down here. Notice these rules are for the landmark collection, so it actually might override the information we have up here. So you have to be aware when you write rules in rules that that you follow the right guidelines. You can also write it like this, and I think it's really up to you, but I feel that this is just easier for me to read. It's the same idea pretty much. So here you see we have cities with landmarks, right? But you can actually write it directly like this. So you say cities, city, landmarks, landmark. If they have the same conditions, that's just faster. We have the wildcards you can put in here, meaning that it's any document in the cities right here. So that's also possible. And actually, I also think, yeah, it's also sub-collections. So this would be maybe a good way to, if you don't want to allow anybody to work with your documents or any sub-collections under documents, you can put this in here. And here's where sometimes you have to notice that there's difference between version 1 and version 2. So remember, we're using version 2. So remember to switch to the new version. So it's again, it's really not, I said it a few times, but it's really not complex to do this. I think my goal for this project, just so you guys have kind of a starting point, is that you guys can set up security and say you're not allowed to read and write, to write to all documents. You're only allowed to write to some. Maybe you're not allowed to write to any documents unless you're an admin. And maybe you even want to only be able to read some documents if you're specific types of users. Like you might not want to be able to read the user data if you're not an admin, for instance. So stuff like that. And that's what I expect that you guys can set up in these security rules. And that should be very easy. And there's plenty of guides out there to help you out if you're struggling. And I'm also here in worst case. This is kind of an overlapping, that's what I talked about before. The overlapping match statement is something that you need to be aware of. If you have multiple allow expressions that match a request, the access is allowed if any of the conditions are true. Okay? So this is kind of a scary one because you'll notice I have these two and they're actually overlapping, right? Because here I say for specific cities, but here I say everything, and this actually ends up being, since this is false, that's great, but the problem is that this second statement is true, and that actually means that anybody can access the cities anyway, even though I thought I protected them. So you have to beware if you're putting in statements twice, you have to beware of what you're doing, right? You have to take care of overlapping match statements right here, or else you might end up opening up your entire database again, even though you thought you closed it down. But this is where testing and this is where it's good to do testing, and where it's actually also good to to try out these security rules in the emulator or inside Firestore's own rule engine down here, the playground, right? That's a good way to do that. Let's try and go back. We could try to say, nah, we'll get back to this. It's more fun. Okay, there are also some limitations. Go and read these. You can max have some 10s for single documents, max have 10 exist and get after. Go and read this. I don't want to go through this. It's you just have to read it. It's just limitations, and you shouldn't hit any of these limits unless you are overcomplicating your database. So it shouldn't be a problem. Sweet. Let's try and go to the next one. Conditions for security rules. And this is where you guys can go and find examples of how, for instance, you can make sure you are authenticated, right? And of course, if you know you have a very certain user, you could go in here and say with a specific ID if you wanted to. So he has to have a certain ID. So instead of not equal, you could say equal and a certain ID. And then you might have a super admin who was the only one who could access users. I don't know. You could do something like that. We also here, they try and use the granular part where they go in and say you can read, update, and delete if you have a certain user ID and that is your own. So this means that you're only allowed to update, read, and delete if you're yourself, right? So this, it could be a post, or it could be a forum, something where you wrote a note or something, and then you're only allowed to delete this and update and read this yourself, because you don't want anybody else to access it because it might be in a diary or something, I don't know. And you're not allowed to create if you are not logged in. So that's another example. And again, the examples are pretty good in here, so I think you guys should get going fairly easy. This is what I talked about, where we have some data validation, where he goes in and he says, the data that is going to be changed, I'm just going to invite Christian again, seems he got thrown off. Here it says, if the resource, the data of the resource that we're building right now, so of course you need to know there's a field called resource you can access and a field called data you can access. And this is actually the data for the document, right? So it means right here, this is a way for me to only allow people to see cities and read cities from the database if they have a field called visibility that is public. No, you shouldn't be able to, that's a question right here, you shouldn't be able to overlap two different collections. No, it's only if you have the same name right here where one is true and the other is false, then you end up with overlap. Okay? So you shouldn't be able to do it if you have a match for cities and a match for products. There shouldn't be any overlap, no problem. Don't worry about that. Okay, so the resource is an important one to know, and it's pretty neat that you have this public visibility field, for instance. This is actually a pretty nice way to hide data and show data, and by making this small field right here, I can actually go in and make sure that I have full control about what people can read and what people can't read. But it's of course another field you need to manage. Okay, let's just keep going. We have another example right here where they are a bit more complex example. I have to move things around again because I want to be able to see the chat. There we go. Make sure all cities have a positive population and the name is not changed. So here we have a pretty cool one, because you'll notice I'm saying the request resource. Notice there's difference here. Before we talked about the resource. Now this is the resource for the current document in the database. Okay, so this is the one that's already inside the database. Okay, so we have right here, we have the resource for the local database, meaning the one you are actually securing yourself in right now. But then you can actually also, on your request right here, you can write if request resource. So this is actually a way that you can start validating the data that you're getting from your request, right? So this is the thing that I send from my Angular app or my mobile app or my robot or whatever you guys are sending requests from. You can actually get the data from that one as well. And here I say if the population is larger than 0 and if the request name equals the local name, right? Then I'm allowed to do the update. So you could do this with any kind of validation, right? So you could, everything you have in your service right now, where we kind of try to protect ourselves in the function, you can actually do the same right here now and protect the actual Firestore database. And why do that? Well, if anything that's allowed to write to from Angular or from the outside world, you should protect with some kind of information like this, because again, this is the backend. Yes, that's a good question, Fredrik. Let's start with that one. If even though I make rules, actually I haven't tried that, but Firestore should protect you. But I'm not sure if your admin role will actually work, because you are a direct admin. You might be able to write directly into Firestore using the console. So I'm not 100% sure. We can try that out. That's actually a good question. If you make a rule, can you still create products in Firestore directly? And I think you can, but we should try it out. We should try it out just to be sure. But again, it shouldn't be a problem for any of us, because hopefully we should be the only ones who have access to that database, right? To that console. So it shouldn't be a problem for us anyway. But it's a good question. I'll try that. But still, the point is that you have to remember your backend is where the data resides, and your data is the most important thing in your entire system. We can always change the front end, but the data needs to survive. And that's why it's extremely important that you guys secure your database. And this is one way to do it, like saying you're not allowed to create a new city, you're not allowed to update a new city unless you actually put in the right data, right? So you can make those rules in your system right here. So a rule could be you're not allowed to update if you are not logged in, if you are not an admin, if you don't have all these fields populated, and then you won't be allowed to update. And then you guys have to remember, if that happens, you have to guard yourself in the front end, right? So you have to say in the Angular front end, you have two choices. Either you in Angular say you're not even allowed to click the submit button unless you have all the data, right? So that would be using a form to protect yourself, so the user wouldn't get a message back from Firebase saying, oops, you did something wrong. You have to add the user field. You have to populate this field, right? It would be a lot better for the user to get live feedback before he even presses the submit, saying you're not allowed to submit this unless you put in these fields. But still, even though you do that, you have to remember the front end can be malicious. So you have to remember to put these rules in the back end as well to protect yourself. So that kind of covers both validation and security rules in general right here. So let's keep going, because here's another one that might be something you guys require, and that's accessing other documents. So here what he's doing is he's actually asking if a specific document exists. So if the user with this auth ID even exists, right? You can start doing that as well. So you have access to both get and exists. You can use those to kind of make sure that specific documents exists in other tables or in other collections, in your database. Sweet. So you can see you can already, with the information I gave you now, you can do some pretty complex rule validation in your Firestore. And I'm going to require that you do that when we come back. Then we have some limits again, and I think you guys should go and just check them out. You have a max set of validation rules, and again, I think you can change these if you buy. If you put in more money, you can change some of these. But let's just keep it to a minimum so we don't end up having to buy any Firestore right now. Good. This is another one that I feel is extremely cool. They added a way for you to create functions. Here's a function, and again, you'll notice it's just a JavaScript function. Yay, you learned JavaScript. Yay, no, we learned TypeScript, but it's the same. So this is how you can write the function, right? And the cool thing is that now we can start using the same information. You still have access to the request field. You still have access to the resource field. So now you can start making some validations in general, and then you can just do an if statement, and this guy just needs to return a true or false. That's just amazing, right? Because now we can actually have functions calling functions, and we can start making an ecosystem in here as well with the rules. It just makes it a lot easier to reuse our code and to make some proper code for later usage. Oh, this is an important point. Rules are not filters. So notice right here, I think it's a pretty good point, because this is denied. I'm getting all cities, right? But the problem is that if there's any city in there that's not public, it'll actually be denied. Okay, so that's kind of a thing you need to be aware of. If there's any city in here that's not allowed, I'll actually be denied in the way that this guy was set up right here. Okay, with this setup right here. So that's why they put in, I only want the ones where visibility is equal to public. Then everything will be allowed. And I think this is, again, a good thing actually, because it forces you to consider only getting the visible cities. Why would I try to get all cities if I'm only looking for the ones that are actually visible right now in this request right here? So it's a pretty important point. Good. This is where we talk about how it affects your queries. And I think that's also important for you guys to know, because we've already used some of the queries. And there are some queries, again, they start out with the one we just talked about. They're not filters. And again, as you start going down right here, you can go and read this yourself. But again, we have some examples where queries will fail because of some of the rules in there. And then you'll have to actually change your query because you made some changes in your rules. So you have to be aware that changing your rules will actually also change your queries in Angular Fire. So you just have to be aware of that. And sometimes you'll have to make a few changes there. And that's again why it's a good idea to get started with these rules. And the earlier on you get this set up while you write your code, again, if you are more feature driven, the easier it is for you to change the rules, set up security, write your condition, complete a feature, right? It's back to the same point. Instead of writing the entire Firestore database, writing the entire rule set, writing the entire Angular frontend, writing the entire mobile app, and then setting it up with the backend, do it feature driven. Make one feature work, make another feature work, right? And every time you'll have a rule that's set up, and then you'll make sure that everything is running and your rule is running and everything is great. So let's keep going right here. Here's something where you can use fields for it. Again, well, there's a lot you can do. So you'll have to spend some time yourself just reading about it. A bit about, you can actually use array contains any. That's a new feature that came with one of the newer Firestore. I can't remember which one, but it came with a newer version. But you can actually start looking inside arrays. And again, you have to again be aware that it might fail on different scenarios. So you have to be aware of that. So here the example is, if your resource data is above 5 in count, and here you'll notice I only have 5, so that will fail. Here I have, I have some that are less than 5. Sorry, so that will fail, and here I have above 5 in all of them, so that'll work. So again, you have to be aware. I think the point is that go and read if you get some weird exceptions after you change your rules, because you might need to change the way that you're working with these rules. Another one that I want to show you guys before we actually move on is this one, test your security rules. Again, we talked a lot about testing, and as some of you might have felt the pain of testing now and are really not a fan of it, I still want you guys to know that it's there, and I don't feel that you guys should stop testing at any point. It's extremely important that you guys learn to test, and here's actually another reason to start doing it, another chance to do some testing. What they give you is 2 quick start guides, one with JavaScript. Use that if you want to. I think that's probably going to be the most easy one to use, but you can also use a TypeScript one. And it's really not complex to write any of them. They don't use Jest. So remember again, Jest is a framework. They use another framework, and I can show you in a second, but it's really not important. You just have the same idea, the same basic flow, so you should be able to use any of them. And I can find a guide on how to set up Jest instead, so you can use the same testing framework here. The cool thing about this one is that they give you a good understanding about the different ones. So we have a match and we have an allow right here. You can go and read about the different names. This is the statement that identifies the documents in the database, so the match, and this is an expression that controls access to those documents again. So it's, if you go back to my example right here, you'll see we have the match looking for specific documents, and then we have the allow saying if it's allowed to read and write to these documents right here. Let's just keep going. The way that you're testing is actually using the emulator, and if you haven't installed that, you need to do a Firebase install, and there's a setup emulator right here for Firestore. You can run that command and then you'll set it up, and then you can run the emulator just firing this command only for Firestore. Let me just try and do it because I pretty much set everything up, so I should be able to do it right now. Now I might as well just tell you, I don't have any test right here for Firestore Rules, but still it actually triggers the other tests as well, I think. So I get all the tests triggered right here. But what it actually did was it started a local version of Firestore right here. So that was kind of to get it up and running. I'll jump to this TypeScript quick start right here. You can also use the JavaScript, as I said. And this is actually a full project right here. I'll try and go into the test file. And here you can see what it takes to do the test. And cool thing, explained, pretty much everything is explained for you what you're doing. There are a few things you need to set up first, like we need Firebase Testing, which is actually a pre-built testing framework that Firebase built for you, where they have a lot of things we're mocking right now. They have that built into the system right away. We have FS is reading the file system. That's because we need to read some files locally. This is something that you might need in any system if you want to read files from that system. It's a pretty neat feature to have. We put in the project ID, you need that. Of course, that is available on your Firebase. We get the rules, and this is where we read the file. And the file we read is pretty much just the rules file. So again, if I go into my code, that's not the one. If I go to my code, it's reading this file right here. That's the first step. Let's go back. And it uses that rules file later on to do some testing. Then this is where it creates a new app with authentication data matching the input. So it pretty much creates an app with the project ID and some authentication. So this is faking authentication locally. And now we have an app, and then we have the test cases. And this is something you should be already, you've seen before at least, where we start out with the before statement right here, meaning that before we do anything, we want to load the Firebase rules, right? So this is where we set up the rules for our Firestore database. Just so you guys know, when you guys run change a rule in here, Firestore does the exact same thing for you on Firebase, right? It loads this file and sets up the rules for you before you can do anything else. So this is the same thing we're doing locally now. We're setting up the rules locally. And then before each statement, we clear Firebase data. Okay, so we just clear it. After each statement, we delete the app. Something like that, it seems. And then this is where we start writing the actual test. So here we have the first, we need to write suite to get started. And then we have a class. And then we start testing. And again, you can copy this file if you want to. That's perfectly fine with me. And just use this as your test file to get started. And then again, you can use different small test files if you want to split into more rule sets. Okay. But here's the first test. We make the test async. We say require users to log in before creating a profile. Okay, so this is a way for us to kind of, you have the same setup yourself probably, where you can create a user, but then afterwards you can create a profile. Okay, so let's try and check this out. They start by getting the database, and then they say, I want to get users with the document of Alice. And then here's the assert. So this is where we test what we expect should happen. And then we can keep checking out these different tests right here. And you can go and write it yourself if you want to. I will add this to my own functions and I'll deploy it so you guys have something you can check out if you want to in GitHub. Oh, yeah, we'll take a break in a second. Okay. There's also assert succeeds, etc. But you can check out these. It's TypeScript, so that's the cool thing with TypeScript compared to JavaScript. If you do the dot right here, you'll get a full list of everything you can do. That's pretty nice. So you have a good list about how you can work with this. Sweet. Yeah, by the way, if you're kind of confused about this guy, it's just creating a Firestore access point with either null, that means there are nobody logged in right now, or in this case it's Alice who is logged in right now. And in this case down here, you'll notice there were 2 logged in, I think. Yeah, so here we create one that's logged in with Alice and one that's logged in with Bob. So this is how easy it is for you to make a Firestore app representation that's logged in or is not logged in, right? So it's fairly simple. And again, I think this is a great way again to play around with some testing to make sure. And again, let's just say, I think the assignment would be something like, you need to be able to log in and secure that you're logged in to change your product data. You need to be logged in first, and then you can make a small test just proving that that is the case. You need to be logged in to make any changes to the product data. Good. And again, if we go back just to show you the rest of this example right here, they have a quick start right here on how you can use it. And here's actually the command I need to run to do the actual test. Let's just go back. This is just starting the emulator, what I did. But if I want to also run the test, I can actually trigger this one. Now there's a small thing in my setup. First of all, I don't have any tests. And if I look in my package.json file, there's no test right here, you'll notice. So it'll actually go and grab that test from my package.json file right here and say, well, I guess he wanted to do jest. Just so you guys know, if you do it in the functions folder, you might get some conflicts with this call right here. But what can I do then? Well, if I go back to the example right here, he says he's calling something called npm test. And again, if you guys, when you get used to this setup they have right here, you can see I can go to the package.json file here and see that it actually calls Mocha instead. So I can just go and create this test. Let me just try and show you. So I can make a new test right here called, I think I'll call it test Firestore, like this. And again, it's just a command. So if I try to run this now and I say test Firestore, like this, and I just make sure this is saved. Let's just try and run this now. Now there are no tests, so it might fail. Yeah, right, because I don't have any tests. So it looks for the folder and it can't find it. And I probably don't even have Mocha installed right now, but you get the point. I think I'll actually encourage you guys to do the following. I think I'll encourage you guys to actually download this entire test project. Let me just try and do it actually. But if you want to do this, I think the most important way to do it is you download this. Let's just download this zip. I'll just try and show you. Download the zip. I'll go into my downloads now and get it. There it is. Now the one I'm interested in is Firestore quick start right here. So I'll grab this one. I'll actually rename it first and say Firestore Rules, like this. I'll copy that folder. I'll go to my documents, my work, my Angular Fire, and the salon. I'll just create a completely new folder right here. No, I'll actually paste it in here and I'll call it Hairdress Salon Rules. like this. And this is how I'll do it instead, because it just makes it a lot easier for me to set up everything. And let's just try and open this folder inside WebStorm. Do it in a new window. So now it's opened, and I'll run the npm install. Again, the package.json file, of course, needs some specific information right here. So notice these are the guys that I need. While that runs, I have a Firebase JSON file right here. I have a Firestore Rules set right here. And I guess I'm also logged in right now. So let's just say Firebase login. And that's of course important because I need to be logged in. And we have a rule set right here. So next step would be to see if the test actually runs. So let's go back to his example. And again, since this is run locally right now, it shouldn't be a problem. Go back to this example right here, into Firestore emulator, into TypeScript, and just run the emulator with the npm test. And now since my emulator, since my system is actually now running directly against this setup, I won't get into any conflicts with another package.json file. So I think that would be, you see right here, I might hit the functions. So I think that would be a good way to do it, to be honest. So that's just an encouragement to switch that. Okay. So it's a single folder. But still, I should be able to run the command. I just want to be sure that I shut it down. No, I have the emulator running right here. Let's just shut that down. Or maybe that's testing. I'll just shut it down. I don't want to break. There we go. Let's try and run the command again. Didn't I get the command? There we go. So notice now I'm actually testing the rules right here, but I'm testing them locally. Okay, so here we go. All 7 tests passed, right? But notice I don't have the request ID or the user, anything that he talks about. I'm just testing the rules locally. So of course the rules needs to match. These rules needs to match the data that you have in your cloud solution, right? So, but that's the point. So now I can from here start working with my rules, and when I'm done, I can deploy my rules to my Firebase version. Sweet. Let's just see. I think I pretty much covered everything I wanted to cover with the rules, and then we can have a break. Let's just have a look. That was also an hour of talking. Sorry about that. So this is the test. And again, I think it could be cool again to do a few tests just to see that you guys know how to do it with these different rules. Yeah. Let's take a break.